So I wanted to show the process of transferring your drawing onto your linoleum block to prep it for carving. So to do this, you just need a couple simple tools, and the first one being a piece of tracing paper or a relatively transparent type of paper like newsprint. Also a standard pencil, nothing too hard or too soft. I think this is just a 2B, and each pencil will transfer a little bit differently, so just something to keep in mind. And then I'm going to go ahead and use a bone folder, which is a bookbinding tool for the transfer process, but you can also use your thumbnail or anything with like a hard, blunt edge should work fine. So here I have my drawing, and you see that I have some darker areas highlighted. I have kind of some rough marks that I'm going to be making, but I essentially have my kind of key image or key illustration that I'm going to be able to trace pretty easily because the paper is nice and transparent and the marks underneath are quite dark. So I'm just going to use my pencil and kind of pick out the key areas, the key moments that are the most important, where there's a lot of details, and go from there. So the process basically works in that I'm going to make a tracing on the tracing paper. I'm going to put that on top of my Lino Block graphite side down, and then I'm going to use pressure to transfer that directly on top of the block. That way I know which areas to carve and which areas to leave alone. So that's just kind of the main thing that you want to remember. You're just trying to get those key areas and the areas that are most important without sacrificing too much time or detail, because this is one part of the process and it's the easiest way to do it in a home studio without a printing press or the use of harsh chemicals. So what I like to do is use some painter's tape because it's not too sticky, and I'm going to go ahead and place my tracing paper directly on top of my drawing, and I'm just going to put a piece of tape on there, that way it doesn't move around too much. And essentially I'm just going to kind of trace the key elements, that way they transfer and I'm not completely lost when I go ahead and start carving on my actual block. Now once I get to a point where I feel like I have my entire image, I can go ahead and line it up and see what it looks like, see if I missed anything, and I can always add that if I need to. Notice that I'm actually taking away some of the details. I can always reference back to my original image and even think about things like the background as well. So now what I can do is go ahead and take this image graphite side directly on top of the Lino Block, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of tape on all four sides. That way it's nice and secure, and that way I can do my transfer process relatively easily without the page moving too much. So now I have my tape on all four edges, and I'm just going to go ahead and use my bone folder, and I can even again use my edge of my finger if I need to, but I'm just going over the areas where there is information, and I'm just trying to hold the paper down as securely as possible so that way there's not too much movement. And I'm apologizing because the camera moves a bit because it's mounted on my actual table, so I hope that's not too distracting. But essentially applying pressure, not jabbing, not poking, not stabbing into the lino, but just like a nice firm even pressure all throughout. And I'm going to go ahead and do a time lapse here just so you can kind of get the impression. And it's always a good idea to kind of see what the progress is looking like. So I can peek at it. If it needs more work, I can keep at it. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. So I can go ahead and take a peek, and it looks like my image has transferred quite well. It's not 100% super dark, but at least it gives me an idea of areas that I might need to fill in a little bit. So I can go ahead and just use my graphite pencil and try to kind of re-aliven some of those areas that aren't quite dark enough for me to see. So I'm just going to do that in some areas. You don't have to do this part. It depends on what your style or your way of working tends to be. But I think this looks pretty good. I'm just going to make a couple adjustments and actually try to darken it with a marker as well if I can find it. And I'll just show you, for example, what it looks like when you use a marker that's not too dark. So here I have this funky fluorescent orange, which isn't quite cutting it, but in a pinch, if you don't have the right materials, this can at least give you an impression of where your dark areas are going to be. And this is a step that's not 100% necessary, but it does help, and it kind of helps you see where your dark areas will be, because remember, when we carve, we are working with carved and uncarved areas to describe a surface and areas that will hold ink. So just something to think about. And here I have my image. I'm just kind of keeping that in mind and thinking about areas that I know are going to be dark without too much confusion. And I even omitted some of these lines in the face and then the earrings, but just thinking about the areas that I know I want to keep dark, and that's the areas that I'm going to try to work on. So here's the orange marker. I'm going to go ahead and use my black marker, and I'll show you what that looks like. So thankfully I found my black marker. This one's the Copic markers, and they tend to work pretty good. It has the chiseled wide edge, and then there's also the more fine tip area too. And you can use like a permanent marker. These markers work good. My best suggestion would be to experiment and see what works. You will go through a lot of markers this way, so just keep that in mind. But at least it's giving me an idea or an impression of my dark areas. And with the Copic marker, it's nice because it almost has like this hair texture to it. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a time lapse because I don't think there's too much more to explain. And hopefully that helps you kind of understand this process a little bit more. And thank you so much for watching.